Okay, it's 2 o'clock, so I'm gonna call the meeting to order. Thanks everyone for being here. Approval of last previous minutes. Can we get an approval for the minutes? Thank you, sir. Can I get a second? All right, thank you. Any additions or comments on the agenda in front of you? Anything else we need to talk about that I missed? Okay with that, take that as a no. All right, I'll turn it over to Tom, first of all.
Nothing really to cover, just the ballots are going to be coming out early next week. Make sure you're patient. We're relying upon the U.S. Postal Service, so sometimes your neighbor can get it before you. If you, the emails go out in small waves, so they don't get blocked by the spam filter. So once again, your neighbor may get it before you. Check your spam filter. If you still don't receive it after a couple days, please contact us and we'll track down what the problem is. Typically what the issue is people change their email address and don't tell us. But we can update it and get you it. So please do your research and vote for who you feel is the most qualified candidates.
All right, thanks. Trey, you got anything to talk about? I always leave you to last, but I thought I'd call on you first.
Yeah, I'll start it off. Two things. One, it rained all week last week, and it's gorgeous today. We didn't have a meeting during January when the weather's terrible. Maybe we think about that for next year. But the marina is open, and we have sunshine. Boats are out. We got bait. Come on down. And you can get we'll talk more about the grass carp raffle, but starting tomorrow, you can bring your dead carp to the marina, and we will give you a raffle ticket.
Okay, great, good deal. All right, Rick, I'm gonna turn it over to you next.
Are we sharing? So the siphon is off at Norwood. It's filling naturally. We did do some dredging at the back of the cove there earlier this week. Made some gravel beds for spawning habitat, and the structures that the fly tyers have put together for us will be installed in the next week or two.
So is it full?
It's not full, but I do have good news about Lake Brittany.
It's full.
It is full. So we talked about the work we did at the boat ramp last month. Let's see, the Rangers ended the month on an upswing, 4,290 contacts for the month. That is up substantially over February, which was 965, and up quite a bit over March of 2024, which was at 2,824. Grounds maintenance, like I said, Lake Brittany is back to full pool. In the process of doing buoy checks on all the other lakes. I know there's been some buoys that have moved around and broken loose. We're getting those back. Also, the the end of the fly tire dock at the marina broke loose last week with the wind. And have you seen anything out of Mark this week?
No, it's still tied up.
Okay. He said he was going to get to it by Monday of next week. So that'll be put back together. Let's see. Staffing. We have all of our lake rangers for the summer identified. We have 2 that have already started and 2 that are in the onboarding process. All of our, we do have 1 additional hire to make in grounds maintenance. In our fisheries and lakes ecology area, we have Christmas trees that still need to go in at Norwood. They can go in now that the lake is coming up. We stocked 60,000 threadfin shad in Loch Lomond the week of March 24th. And then 2 days later, they began spawning. So we maximized the bang for our buck on that deal, I think. And then, was it last week or the week before? Last week we harvested 10,000 bluegill from one of our aquaculture ponds, and those were in the range of 2 to 6 inches. We are preparing our aquaculture ponds to go back with bluegill. We were strongly advised not to try to raise threadfin shad. They're extremely difficult. So all of those fish went into the lake, and we'll be putting our effort into bluegill for aquaculture this year. We were out the other day sampling Loch Lomond, looking for some grass carp. We did move a few. I think we removed 6 big grass carp. We also, for the first time in our sampling anywhere on any of the lakes, got a smallmouth bass. And I know Matt has been, how many of you caught over the years?
6 or 7.
Yeah. Matt's got a knack for catching them. But they weren't stocked on purpose in any of the lakes, but they are beginning to show up. I don't know if we have somebody helping us out with that or not, but that's okay. And then the grass carp raffle. I didn't print out enough to go around, but I don't know if the camera's on me or not, but you'll be noticing this at the kiosks, at the various boat ramps, and there'll be a large printout of this. Is it going to be on the marina door or somewhere else? On the marina door. We are actively still trying to get rid of grass carp so we can bring back some native vegetation. We're doing something kind of special this year where we're giving away $100 a month in a raffle drawing. So basically, you show a staff member proof of catching a grass carp. We want to know which lake, a date, that kind of information. And we'll give you a raffle ticket, and the drawing will be at the end of each month. The first drawing is going to be at the end of April. And then we'll contact the person that won and give them a little money for helping us out with this project. And then also, we've got our creel survey, which has gone live now. Chris will talk more about that in his presentation. But basically just we want to get a report on what people are catching and also some of their attitudes towards fishing in Bella Vista. And that's all I have.
So, quick question, has the well been shut off at Lake Brittany since the lake is full?
Yes,
Okay.
it has. It was shut off before the rain because going down that big hill, if there was any maintenance that needed to happen, they wouldn't be able to get a truck down there.
Okay. Just checking. Anybody else have questions for Rick before we move on to?
I had one. Is there some tips for how to catch a grass carp?
We haven't had our fish feeders working for a while, but they are attracted to fish feed, and you can mimic that by soaking dog food in water for a bit and then using that on a hook. If you can get it to float, it's better. I have had people use grass clippings, wrap grass clippings in a little bundle, stick a hook in it, and people have caught them that way too.
Okay.
Yeah,
I've caught a few on crickets, believe it or not.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
When there's nothing to eat, they're desperate.
Yeah. And a really good place when the mulberries are dropping, the mulberry tree right there at the marina is a good place to hook into them.
That'll be a fishing only area though. That's where the public accesses the rental boats, so we're gonna discourage the boats there.
One question I have, Rick, before we move on. Latest rainfall effects in terms of clarity and fertilization schedules. So I know we've got a little bit of help from the rain, but Lake Lomond is still extremely clear right now.
So it's going to take, the rain was gentle enough that we really didn't get a lot of turbidity, mud in the water. It is the time of the year where people are fertilizing their lawns, so we are likely going to get some benefit from that, but it's going to take up to a week or so, especially since the water is still pretty cold. We get the rain that we got, it rained in the mid-40s, so it brought our lake temperatures down close to 10
degrees,
5 to 10 degrees. So it's going to take a little bit for any of those inputs to be recognized in more colored water or opaque water. And we want the water to go down a little bit too, because we don't want to put fertilizer in the lakes and have it flush out. But over the next 10 days to 2 weeks or so, we're going to be monitoring closely and then begin fertilizing if we need to.
So all the water checks have begun, temperature and clarity and all that have begun in all the lakes then, correct?
Yes, the volunteer Secchi program started this past Monday, so
Okay.
it's been a couple of days.
Okay, any other questions for Rick? Okay, I think we'll let Chris do his presentation now, if you're ready to go, Chris.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Chris, and I'm going to be talking to you about the largemouth bass end of the year quality assessment. So before we get started, I'm going to go over a few bits of background information to hopefully put some of this data into better perspective. The first is ecosystem carrying capacity. So carrying capacity is the amount of organisms that an ecosystem can support given the available food and shelter. On our lakes, you can think of it in terms of the pounds of fish. So as an example, we might have a small pond that can support 50 pounds of fish. So you could have 50 1-pound fish, you could have 10 5-pound fish, or you could have 10 5-pound fish or 5 10-pound fish. But that's not a very balanced system, so we would prefer something that kind of has a mix of those different size classes in them. So we got, 15 1-pounders here and 3 5-pounders and 2 10-pounders, but it's still 50 pounds. So how does carrying capacity determined in a reservoir like what we have? So I've got a little diagram here. This is the life cycle of the lake, but it is a good representation of carrying capacity. So carrying capacity in a reservoir is determined by the internal resources of the lake. That's what is there when the valley is first flooded. We have the external inputs. That's what flows off of the landscape. Rick was talking about the rain events bringing nutrients in. That's what that is. So on this graph here, we got time across the bottom and units across the y-axis over there. So the black line is fish populations, and the dark yellow line is the internal resources. Again, that's what's there when it's flooded. And then the dotted line that's just going to go straight across represents the stable external inputs. That's rain events, people fertilizing, and whatnot. So in the first 20 years, you'll see that the internal resources have become heavily utilized, and you have an explosion of the fish population, and that peaks out at around 20 years. After 20 years, though, the internal resources have begun to be all used up, and so they're going to start to crash, and then followed by that, the fish populations are going to start to crash. So you have all these resources and food and places to live, and all of that rots and is used up, and now there's not enough to go around, and you have the fish populations suffer because of that. At around 40 years, you get a stabilization period. So this is where the fish populations crash enough to meet the external inputs. So all those rain events that are bringing nutrients in and people throwing stuff into the lake, Christmas trees and other habitat, that's starting to take up the slack. And so you get your fish populations hovering around that point. And for reference, all of our lakes are well into the equilibrium period. So that's to say you can't expect our lakes to be as good as they were 30 years ago. But we have been into the stabilization period. So the other interesting thing about carrying capacity is that it can be damaged. So you might have an ecosystem that starts out with a certain carrying capacity, but if you exceed the number of organisms that are able to be supported, then you can actually decrease future carrying capacity. So I've got a little example here. Let's say we have 4 chickens, and they lay some eggs. And then we have a couple of people eating those eggs. So we got 2 eggs per person here. And everything is fine, and the people are healthy. But the people have some kids, and now we have to start feeding 4 people with these 4 eggs. But that's not quite enough. So at some point, they get too hungry, and they have to eat a chicken. And now we're down an egg and a chicken. And then the cycle gets even worse because now there's fewer eggs, and so you have to eat another chicken sooner, and so on. And so at this point, the people are emaciated, and they're having trouble because there's just not enough food, and 1 egg is not enough. So what we have to do is remove 2 of the people, and we have to make efforts to replace our chickens and let them grow up so they can start making more eggs. So in our example here, the people are the largemouth bass, and the chickens are bluegill broodstock. So in general, our lakes have too many largemouth and not enough feed or bluegill. And so not only are the largemouth eating the bluegill, but we have anglers also harvesting the bluegill. And it's probably the worst during the spring where you're taking adults off of nests. And that's very detrimental where we are now. So we need to make a conscious effort to kind of reverse this. And as Rick mentioned, we did stock about 10,000 up to 6-inch bluegill in Lomond last week. So we are working on that. So now we'll get more into the data, but keep those previous points in mind. So we do 2 samplings per year of electrofishing. We have spring and fall electrofishing. In the spring, you have adults in very shallow water up on the shore making beds, and you have juveniles also in that location because that's where the vegetation tends to grow up most frequently, especially along the shorelines, water willow particularly. And so most of the fish population is up on the shore close. So this is where we're going to get the best estimate of population numbers. In the fall, the fish are not worried about breeding, and so they're kind of more spread out along the shoreline depth-wise. But they are actively feeding for winter, and they're putting all their resources to get fat. So that means we're going to have the best estimate of body quality for fish. So as we go through, we're going to look at each of the lakes with some of these values. So I've got 4 graphs to show you. We'll go through each of them. So along the top, you have the spring data, and along the bottom, you have the fall data. In the upper left over there, you have spring catch rates. That's the total number of fish caught per hour of electrofishing. And then over here on the whole right side, we have size distribution. So that's how those fish break down in terms of size groups. So we're like 50% of them this big, and 20% were this big. And then finally, we have in the bottom left over there, relative weight. So relative weight is how the weight of a fish compares to the average for how big it is. So for example, we have, say, a 12-inch bass, and we might expect it to be 1 pound. Well, any weight above or below that is reflected as a percentage of that 1 pound. So it could be 150% relative weight. So that means it's 50% bigger. So it's 1.5 pounds, for example. So we'll look at each of these graphs. So the first one is the catch rate of the spring data. So on the bottom you have time, and on the side you have the total number of fish caught. And on this graph, each lake is represented as its own line, and the lake that is in focus has a bolded line. The other thing that you'll notice is If I can get the pointer to work. Whoop. There we go. Is that there are these horizontal lines that represent the regional averages and percentiles for our ecoregion. So other lakes, generally where we live, should have these kinds of numbers. So the next graph that we have is the size distribution. It's,
I'm sorry,
Yep.
real quick, when you say our region, is that Lake of the Ozarks and Table Rock?
Southeast United States.
Okay.
So the two on the right side here, these are the size distributions. So on the bottom you have the length groups. Here's all fish that are 8 to 12 inches, for example, 12 to 15 inches. And then the percentage of that is represented on the percent catch is represented on the y-axis. You also notice the horizontal lines across here, and again, this is the regional expectation. So ideally, you would have roughly 50% of the fish be in the 8 to 12 inch category, and roughly 27% of the fish be in the 12 to 15 inch category, for example. Also on these graphs, within each group, the grayscale is through time. So, you know, this is 2018 and this is 2024. And finally, we have the relative weight graph. So the inch class is down here on the bottom, and the relative weight is represented on the y-axis. The 100% or expected weight is the red horizontal line. This year's data is represented as the black dotted line. We have a gray polygon, which is the minimum and maximum for the last 8 years, since 2018, and the darker gray line in the middle of that polygon is the average for that time period. And we'll go through all of this. You'll see these a lot as we go through. So, but before we get there, I want to bring up a couple of big graphs here, key points that kind of hammer on some of the previous things that we've talked about. We have too many largemouth bass, so this is catch rates for all of our lakes, and you can see the mean for our ecoregion should be around 150 fish per hour, and we're anywhere from 150 to 300 fish per hour. So in some cases, we are double the largemouth bass catch rate that we should be. The other point that I talked about was that we have too few bluegill. And you can see that by our ecoregion, we should be getting somewhere around 275 bluegill per hour of electrofishing, and we're catching, you know, maybe 50 at most. So we are, again, far below what we should be. Too many bass, too few bluegill.
Hey, Chris,
Yeah,
for purposes of your graphs, did you combine red ear and bluegill?
I did not. This is bluegill only.
Okay. We
We typically don't get enough red ear in the sample for it to make much of a difference. If I were to combine any two, it would probably be bluegill and green sunfish. And then finally, we have a comparison of the relative weight of all of the lakes. So the previous graph was just relative weight for a single lake for 2024, but this shows all lakes for 2024. And the point here is that relative weights are pretty similar across lakes for this past year. They're all within plus or minus 5% of each other. And usually they're hovering around the, 87% relative weight, which is not bad. So I want to give you that impression. Like, you know, if a fish is 90% relative weight, he's not going to look emaciated. He's going to look relatively healthy, and that's okay. So we have our first lake here. We have Ann, denoted as the darker pink line in the upper left. You can see that generally we have too many bass on that lake. And you can see over here that most of those bass are in the 8 to 15 inch range. So 50, something like 90% of bass are less than 15 inches that we caught. You can also see here in the bottom that those fish tended to be on the skinnier side compared to the historical data. We're at the low points for relative weight for the last 7 years. And in the fall, most of those fish were on the smaller size, the 8 to 12 inches. So on Avalon, we have a similar story. We have too many largemouth up here. We have well above what's expected. Again, most of the fish are less than 15 inches. And again, we are looking at smaller fish compared to our historical rates. And again, for the fall, most of those fish were less than 12 inches. For Brittany is a little bit of an exception. We have generally fewer fish on Brittany because it's a less productive lake. And a lot of the nutrient inputs there come from the interaction between trout and the largemouth. So there is some stability here. We get fewer total bass on Brittany than would be expected. You can see we're at about 100 fish per hour of electrofishing instead of like 300 fish. But the relative weight is actually very stable, and the fish that we catch on Brittany tend to be very healthy looking. On average, we're about 90%, and 2024 was no different. You can also see up here in the spring size distribution, we have far more larger fish on Brittany than we tend to get on the other lakes. Oh, well, let's go back one. Yeah, we tend to get more larger fish, 12 inches and up, than we do on the other lakes. Lomond would be another example that has historically, in the last 7 years, been on the healthier side. You can see that the catch rate has not been as egregious on Lomond as it has been on some of the other lakes. We've actually been at the mean or lower in some years, which is good. But you can see that in this past year, 2024, this last point, we've peaked out, again, close to 300 fish per hour. And I think that reflects that's reflected in the poor relative weight of the fish on Lomond this year. So 2024 for Lomond was the 7-year low for relative weight, going down to around 80, which is a little on the skinny side. You can also see that a lot of the fish that were caught in the sample were, 70% of or 75% of them were less than 12 inches. So we really want to make sure that we're harvesting those smaller fish to help give those bigger fish more food and raise that relative weight up. For Norwood, we tend to have a lot of bass on Norwood, and they tend to be very small. But this is pretty normal for Norwood, and the relative weight hasn't fluctuated much in the last 7 years. And it's not too bad. It's around 90%, which is pretty normal or pretty average for our lake. So it's not great, but it's not bad either. But they're all small. That's the caveat, is that most of the bass that you're going to catch on Norwood are less than 12 inches. For Rayburn tends to hover around the mean for the ecoregion, which is good. Numbers have increased in this past year, and again, I think that is reflected in the relative weight with the low point of the 7 years on relative weight. So this year's Rayburn fish were skinnier than they have been, and you can see that we've lost some bigger fish and gained more smaller fish in the last 7 years. So again, harvest small fish. And finally, we have Windsor. Windsor's the gray line here, and 7 years ago, it was actually had good numbers, more of what we would want. But in the past couple of years, it's increased. And what do you know, much like some of the other lakes who've reached their 7-year high in catch rates, we've got 7-year lows in relative weights. And similarly to Rayburn, we've lost some bigger fish and gained some smaller fish. And that is the rundown for 2024 in fish data. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to entertain.
What measures are you taking to grow bigger fish?
Heavily encouraging the harvest of 10 to 12 inch bass particularly, and even up to 15 inches in some case. We do want you to throw 15-inch bass back and bigger. Keep those in the lake. We don't want to harvest those really big fish, but the medium-sized bass, we want you to get rid of them. And also encouraging the not harvesting bluegill, because, you know, like with the chicken example, we're down to the one chicken right now, and we need to put more chickens in there. So by putting those 10,000 bluegill in there, we're going to help that a little bit, and by using all the ponds this year and the next year for raising more bluegill, that's the adding the chickens back. And so we need to get people to remove, in the chicken example, we need to get anglers to remove the people from the equation. We need to harvest those largemouth out of there.
So aside from anglers taking care of that during the shocking phase, do we harvest any of those? Or
We do. So that is part of our otolith sampling anyway. So we will remove 100 fish or so per lake to take age.
We've been doing that for years anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's not a new thing. So it takes a lot more than that.
Yeah. So for Lomond, for example, where the fish population is somewhere of 8-inch plus fish, largemouth, somewhere in the range of 40 to 55,000. So 100 fish out of Lomond is not all that much, especially when you're considering like 70-something% of them are probably that medium size. So we really want people to get those out of there, because you know we're at the carrying capacity, and we're actually damaging the carrying capacity the more we let them live. But again, we're also other steps that we're taking is fertilizing and making sure that we're keeping a consistent food base for all the prey species.
Gotcha. So one more question, sorry. Have we broadcasted that message to anglers or?
Every day.
Every day, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
We've been harping on that for 15 years now.
Yeah.
Since
Do you
Daryl
think
Bowman
the
was
anglers
here.
make an impact?
Can they make? They can.
Yeah.
But most people still want to harvest the bluegill and release the largemouth.
Yeah.
It's just.
Is there do we need to get these smaller bass out of the lake a little bit at a time? Or is it, I mean, if everybody went out next weekend and we just had sticks and sacks and the removal of these smaller largemouth, do we need to do that over time? Could we do a big shock? Could we do a big push? Could we do like this month we're killing everything, bring your kids? Or does it need to be?
Yeah, I mean, if
Met
you
it out,
had
that
all
shock in the system.
30,000 Bella Vista residents come and harvest one largemouth bass, that would make a huge impact, but it's unfeasible to get that many people out there at once. And part of the reason that we're being very strategic with what we're suggesting. So fish that are less than 15 inches, within that 10 to 15 inch size range, those are the ones that are putting most of their efforts into breeding. So while removing fish wholesale would help. By removing the brood stock, you're perpetuating that down the line. So that, because, you know, a largemouth, fish can lay tens of thousands of eggs per season. So by taking those breeders out, you're reducing the impact down the line. So would it be good if we could do it all at once? Yes, but it's not really feasible to do that, unfortunately.
There's not a danger to us getting the word out and everybody jumping on it.
No.
The more the
We can
merrier.
do the best we can,
Yeah.
the best we can do.
You're not gonna overdo it.
Okay.
Because we've been underdoing it for years and we've been shouting from the rooftops, so.
And also the other thing that's kind of working against you is for many species, life is incredibly resilient. So let's say we harvested almost everything out of that 8 to 12 inch range. All the fish that are going to be born in the next month will just replenish that. So this process has to take place over an extended period of time where you're removing fish, but you know, from multiple different parts of that population.
We're not
Life
trying
in
to.
itself helps you.
It's not necessarily a campaign. Let's get out there and do it. It's this is what we need to do all the time. This is the new practice.
Correct.
Is that right?
Yeah, because, you know, you can see that in the fall data here. The catch rate, the percent catch rate here, for example, is, you know, 60-ish, 65. And then in the fall, you can see that it's over 80%. So all of the fish that were less than 8 inches have spent the whole summer growing up, and now they're a larger portion of the fish in the fall sample. Now, of course, not all of those fish are going to survive the winter. There is some cannibalism and some predation, and they just die because it's too cold or whatever. But, you know, that's kind of what we're dealing with. There are always more of them because every year they breed. So, like John said, it has to be atrocity. We got to do this all the time.
Is
Yeah.
there a way to track what anglers have harvested? Like, I know with the AGFC, you know, they send out a turkey survey every year if you killed a bird in what county, and like they get their population numbers and they seem to manage it.
That's what we're
decently
doing
well.
with our creel survey.
Is that?
Yeah. So we kind of go about that two ways. We can get general population numbers by doing the electrofishing surveys, but we're also doing the creel survey to see what anglers are catching. Hopefully we'll get enough participation in that to have it make a difference to us on how many anglers are catching and keeping, which is something that we do need to record. That's not a question in there, but it needs to be. That's an oversight. But we do ask them how many fish they're catching of a particular species and about how big they are. So we will have an idea of the catch rate, but you know, unlike with the bigger game where it's kind of a legal requirement, you know, like you can only catch so many deer, you get the tags unless you're poaching. Anglers are a lot less forthcoming with their details than other sportsmen. So that would be very difficult to do unless you just had somebody watching all the time.
Yeah, I was just thinking if, you know, the avid fisherman, if, you know, one guy goes out and harvests 1,000 a year, you know, and documents that the, you know, 50 days he's fishing, if there's a way to like show a tally that backs up some of this info, like we made a dent in it this year, or, you know, the general public didn't even really help us at all. Like, I know you're not going to get full on participation, but if you promote it and get people excited, you know, it might be something that.
I mean, we've had
Probably still won't make it
we've
down,
had
but-
tournament people on our side and understanding this try to get their own tournament groups to do that, and they've had absolute crickets with it. So it seems like some anglers are just not interested in doing that.
Well, and another thing is we're trying to reverse the catch and release stigma from the last 40 years.
Correct.
So, you know, catch and eat is really not in people's minds except for the bluegill and the catfish.
Yeah. This problem is definitely a holdover
Yeah.
from the last century where you went from subsistence fishing to sport fishing, and now we've got all these fisheries that were on that, but now they're, you know, we're breaking the carrying capacity, and so we need to go back to more the subsistence style of catching and keeping fish, because that mortality is calculated in the growth of these reservoirs.
So one of our lakes is an anomaly, Brittany.
Correct.
So what works there could work elsewhere. Is there a more economical way to use that model to do it on some of the smaller lakes? I know that Lomond is a little bit of that's a whole different can of worms, right? But is there a way to duplicate that so that we can have a bigger impact, I would say?
Not really. You know, the Brittany is small, and it's generally pretty shallow across there, except at the deepest point. But the other lakes are deeper in much more of the water body. So other things that we could do, like fertilizing, etc., start to get out of control financially because of the sheer volume of water that's involved. So, you know, I've had people suggest to me watch these YouTube channels where an angler takes this pond and spends $1 million and it makes it amazing, and it's great. But then you look at the pond and it's 20 acres and it's like 10 feet deep at most. And so throwing that little money at that little volume, or that much money at that little volume, can make a huge impact. But when we're dealing with the volumes of water that even our small lakes have, it's totally unreasonable, both financially and people hour-wise, to make a huge dent.
Right. You say that, but it does have some impact on Brittany, we
it does.
believe.
Yeah. So the do you want to chime in, Rick?
I do. Brittany is our outlier. There's nothing going on in Brittany that's applicable to any of the other lakes. Number one, we've got very, very low recruitment of our largemouth. So we have very few being produced. So we have very few being produced means don't have that many mouths to feed. The trout program is great. It provides trout fishing for people, but it also provides a meal for the largest bass in the lake. We can't duplicate that anywhere else. We would go bankrupt. So there's that. We also don't fertilize Lake Brittany and never will. If we did fertilize, we would get more survival of the small largemouth, which would mean more mouths to feed, which means we would have to stock more trout, which means we would spend more money and we would go bankrupt quicker. So,
in an economical way.
Yeah, well, and the reason the overall reason we don't fertilize is because it would create a situation where we lose our oxygen at depth, and we are able to keep trout through the summer in that lake. More biological activity means more consumption of oxygen, and we lose. The bottom of the lake is cold in the summer, and Brittany is the only lake that has oxygen and cold water at depth. So we would lose that. Again, the lake is just totally different. We manage it totally different than any of the other lakes. And as a result, we get a few trophy fish coming out of that lake every year, and that's more of what we manage it for is trophy fish.
Yeah, I mean, to go back to your point, though, I think some of the most economical things to do are what we have done already and what we are going to continue to do. So using our hatchery ponds to raise bluegill is going to be a huge help for these things. Because that's almost free. You know, it's time and labor and then whatever fish food costs, which is comparatively small input for the value that we get out of it.
Would you be telling us the same thing if we were talking about different lakes? Is this a problem that they've got over at Beaver and over in Oklahoma.
So-
is this because of our unique situation, or is this the
It
trend?
is a little bit due to our unique situation. So if you look at a lake like Beaver or Table Rock, those are riverine reservoirs. They are huge. Their watersheds are massive. They're like big chunks of the state. You can see them from outer space. So that is totally different from our lakes, because our lakes are basically the headwaters of the streams. You know, there's not hardly any stream above Lomond or any other of our lakes. If you look at you can just take your pencil on Google Maps and then just draw a circle around Lomond with it expanded out, and you're pretty much covering the watershed. That's it. So the inputs are very small in comparison to what Beaver gets, because Beaver drains a humongous area, and it's farmland and whatever. And if you look at the upstream portion of it, what's in the south, you can see that the water is generally very green and murky, and it only kind of clears up towards the dam where the water's deep and things can settle out. So that kind of gradient and that much nutrient input is a different situation than what we have here. So our lakes are not only headwaters, but they're shaped generally differently. And like if you look at lowland reservoirs, like Lake Maumelle or whatever in central Arkansas, those are generally much shallower lakes, and they're wide, and so like everything can be considered shoreline. So veg can grow abundantly, it's always warm there, and you get much higher rates of production. And if you put in a particular bait fish like shad, you're going to have good success, because largemouth are always in contact with shad, and there's always enough nutrients for the shad to spawn. That's not how it is on our lakes. Our lakes are generally only shallow at the very edges of the shore, and so the veg growth is limited, and there's more separation between those open water bait fish like shad and the largemouth. So we really need to encourage those shoreline prey species like bluegill and red ear to retake their zone, so that the largemouth can have a place to, or something to eat in the place that they are. I hope that answers your question.
Any more questions for Chris before we move on? Thanks, Chris. That's a very good job. Thank you very much. Very informative. All right, what's left on the agenda? So we have 3 committee members who have terms that expire in June. Me, Mike Coughlin, Jeff Reedy, and Scott Soberoff. I think 3 of us are willing to stay on, and I think Scott wants to rotate off, so we'll have an opening. So we probably need. So Jeffrey, okay, so he's not supposed to rotate off. Okay, so so we still only have one. We'll have one opening then, basically. Okay. Let's go to the open. Anybody in the audience have anything to say or comment?
I often see people online asking questions about how to kill this or that, and there's a lot of respondents that talk about using chemicals. Do we do any sort of measurements or testing of the lake waters as to what's ending up in them that we don't want to eat?
We don't. Can you speak to the how it collects and how it degenerates at the inner?
Yeah, so on our lakes, in all likelihood, the amount that is being applied and washed off into the lakes is very minimal. We are not in an agricultural area where that would potentially make a difference. I've said several times during my presentation here that the volume of our lakes is much greater than you might expect from this raw surface area. So the volume is very great. And with that, those chemicals are going to settle out and be buried in the sediment. First of all, a lot of the chemicals that are used, that are available to civilians, is on the low side of toxicity because manufacturers have to be responsible enough to not give something that's very dangerous to uncertified applicators. So the toxicity is either very low and or the half-life of the chemical is very low. So most chemicals are neutralized in two ways, either by UV or by binding to sediments. So even in our own pesticide applications, we do pesticides in the lake from time to time to get rid of algae and nuisance vegetation. And most of that has a very short window of being useful. So Roundup type products generally are not effective in water. They can only be applied over the water because they basically turn off once they get into the water for too long. And some of the other chemicals that are used under the surface are wholly neutralized by sediment. So if we have to be careful with our boat, for example, not to kick out too much stuff on the bottom because it'll just turn off those pesticides. So generally there's not a lot of concern where we are as to the toxicity of commercial pesticides.
That makes sense, thank you.
Anybody else in the audience? Okay, one thing I forgot, any board member comments? I meant to ask you guys earlier.
I just want to say, Chris, that was amazing. You took some complicated data and made it very easy for someone simple like me to understand. Thank you for that effort.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
So do you know what came first, the chicken or the egg?
I'm not tired.
The children. Okay, anything else I left off the agenda? I think we pretty much covered it all. Any comments, questions, concerns from anyone before we adjourn?
I think there was somebody up on the screen.
Sandy? Scott?
No, Scott's good.
Okay. Anybody else?
I just wanted to, Chris, because we've been talking about vegetation, could you?
Oh, I was just gonna say, I didn't have any comments. Thank you.
Okay.
Comment is no comment.
Could you just talk super brief about how carrying capacity relates to the vegetation that we're trying to grow? Because we've been kind of hammering that nail home. I just wanted to make sure we kind of tied that in.
Yeah. So I did kind of mention when I talked about carrying capacity that the two biggest components are food and shelter. There's a bunch of other things that play in. There's a bunch of micro parameters that will potentially limit carrying capacity, and carrying capacity is ultimately limited by the lowest factor of any of those things. But in our lakes, all that's pretty good. So with the vegetation that we have, that is going to allow the smaller fish, particularly the prey species like bluegill, to actually have a place to live. So in our chicken and egg example, it's like having to have those eggs hide like an Easter egg hunt. And so the harder it is for the bass to find those fish, the more likely those bluegill are to grow up and make babies on their own. And it also goes the other way, because the more that we can kind of starve the bass, if they're not fit enough to get the food, then they will die off on their own. So we'll have more natural mortality of predators and more survivor of prey species. Is that good with you, John? Perfect.
Okay, good discussion. Anything else? Going once, going twice. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.